Right.
All right, here we are. Michael Citro, founder and managing editor of The Mainland, the SB Sports Nation blog that covers Orlando City, here to give us a little bit of a MLS Orlando City preview. Michael, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. So, we don't cover a lot of sports on the podcast. However, Orlando City is my favorite team, and we're right at the beginning of the season. Very exciting time for anyone of any fandom. The first weekend of the season. What are you excited about for MLS, and what are you excited about for Orlando City?
Well, I'm excited to get right back into the season after last season Orlando had their best season to date. It was a weird year. It was the pandemic going on. They had the MLS is back tournament in the bubble. Orlando had a new coach and only really was starting to scratch the surface of what they could do when the pandemic hit. They had opening day scoreless draw with Real Salt Lake, and then they went to Colorado, had a draw going there until the dying moments of the game. Colorado scored a late winner. But you could see that this was a team that was more organized than it had ever been, probably since, after Oscar Pereja took over. So there was some good signs, even though the record wasn't great. They go into the MLS is back bubble, and they get that dramatic win over Miami in the first game, and that just kind of propelled them, and they rode that momentum and picked up more momentum on the way. They beat LAFC in a very exciting penalty shootout. And then they went into the final against Portland and really, I think in many ways outplayed the Timbers in that game, but just gave up a couple set piece goals, didn't give up anything really much in the run of play against a very good offensive team. And then they had some opportunities. They just couldn't get that tying goal at the end when they needed it. But they rode that throughout the season, despite missing some very important players down the stretch, most notably João Moutinho, who I think is maybe the most underrated defender in the league last year, left back. He is a guy who really helped the team's offense and also the defense. I mean, obviously he's a good defender, but he gave the team width. He gave the team an attacking spark up the left side. He gave Nani somebody to play off of. Two guys that really understood each other's movements really well. And I think when that went away over the last couple months of the season, there was something missing from the attack, and the team became more defensive minded and more of a counter-attacking team. But they were still able to get success, and they make it to the second round of the playoffs. And, they had a good opportunity there to tie that game late on a penalty. And, you just you tip your cap to Matt Turner and you say, well, it was a great season. And you look forward to this season. So I think we're all excited to see if Orlando City can carry that into season 2. And you're always excited for opening day, and that's tomorrow as you and I record this. Tomorrow's opening day. They're playing Atlanta United, a team that hopes to bounce back after a poor year last year. A new coach, Joseph Martinez, is back, and it's at home. We got an afternoon game here in the Florida. I was going to say the Florida sunshine, but I think it's probably going to be raining.
Some clouds overhead, but that's to be expected going into the summer months. Well, there's so much to be excited about, and you're so right about that. And with MLS being such a parity league, would you say, what do you think has to break our way? Because as long as I've followed the club since 2010, the Steve Donner era and the USL era, we've never felt like one of those teams that can implement our strategy and nobody can get in our way, and with the way the MLS is, 13 different champions over 25 years, there's an incredible amount of parity. What has to break our way for Orlando City to build upon last year?
I think mainly the team just needs to stay healthy, especially at key positions. This is a team that can beat anyone in the league. I think they showed that last year, that they can play with anyone. They're not afraid to play with anyone. They were playing out of the back against that LAFC press last year, not having any trouble with it. They really played well against just about everybody. And even on nights when they were a little bit off and they didn't really have the finishing touch there, they still always looked like the better team. There were very few games where they where you thought, well, they were lucky to get a point there. There were very few of those games. And the first 5 years of the team, there were a lot of those games where they came away. If they came away with a point, it was like, wow, that was fortunate. But
Yeah.
this team looked like it belonged. And it looked like it could make a deep run in the playoffs. And I think, they were undone a little bit by that early penalty in the New England game. But they almost seemed like a team of destiny after the New York City playoff game when, Galese gets, sent off in
Oh
the
my goodness.
penalty shootout, and you can't put your backup goalkeeper in because of the shootout rules. So you got to play a center back there, and you go on and you advance. And it looked like maybe they were a team of destiny, but it ran out on them. I think they were tired down the stretch, and I think they're a deeper team this year, so that should help. But man, they got to stay healthy.
Right.
Got to have Mauricio Pereira healthy because
Yeah.
there's no like for him. He's the only guy on the team that they don't really have a backup that fits in there. I think they're going to be able to rest Nani more this year with Sylvester Vanderwater coming on, a very good young Dutch player, a winger who's a very gifted player.
Great.
You got another year under Chris Mueller's belt. He's only going to get better. I think Benji Michel will get better. And I think a guy who's really flying under the radar that a lot of people aren't talking about is the biggest offseason signing that we've had is Alexander Pato.
Okay.
Very talented Brazilian guy. I mean, they basically got a designated player level player if he plays up anywhere near his capability.
Absolutely.
And they got him for low target allocation money. So he's a guy who could be a difference maker. But they need Zhao to come back. He's still coming back from hip surgery. They need Juan to stay healthy on the right side. Those two fullbacks are very dynamic. They need to keep the center back pairing healthy, and they need to get Nani his rest.
Right.
And they need to keep Pereira healthy. I think if they do those things, even if Daryl DK gets sold and doesn't come back, I think that they can. I don't expect them to win the East, but I expect them to be among the top 5, get in the playoffs, and be set up really nicely for a good run.
Yeah. Well, a few things there. Why do you think fans are so critical of Nani? Because I've been to matches, and he if he's not having a good game, they really dig into it. And I'm like, you know what? He's one of those guys that you've seen in his whole career. It just takes a spark, and that spark could happen in the 89th minute. Just wait for it, let's be upset after the game if he underperforms. Why do you think fans are so tough on him?
It's interesting that you asked that, because I'm also a Manchester United fan. So
Sure.
I was well aware of Nani from years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a player that a certain type of fan will not like him because he fancies himself an entertainer. The game for him, he has to play with flair. That's his game. I mean, that foot. I don't know if you're how familiar you are with Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
TV
Oh, I
show.
love it. Love the game.
So Danny Rojas always says, "Football is life, coach," and that's kind of Nani. I mean, Nani's football is life, and the way he lives his life is he plays with flair. He's I said in my preview, it's you almost can say you almost don't want to say high risk, high reward player, because what he does is typically not that risky, because he's got the ability to pull off these audacious moves that he tries.
Mm-hmm.
But he is an entertaining player. He wants to entertain the fans as well as play well. He wants to play beautiful soccer.
Yeah.
And sometimes that backfires. I mean, this is a league with good players in it. You're not going to always win those 1v1 battles. You're not always going to pull off that cheeky back heel. And sometimes that makes you look bad. But, I know there are fans who say, well, just play the ball normal. And that's just never going to be Nani. Nani's not that guy. He's always going to do it with flair. Yeah.
What's interesting, that's that kind of lends itself to, the original DP. Does Nani still occupy a DP slot? He does, yes. Right? Mm-hmm. That brings me back to the original DP, Beckham. And, outside of free kicks, when he came in for the LA Galaxy, people, fans that were just clamoring onto the game, just following Beckham and his celebrity, were like, oh, well, he doesn't score that many goals. But he'll set up the goals, or he'll make great passes, and he's good to play off other players. And Nani, specifically with, the aggressive style that he plays with, he's gonna, I think, like what you're saying, he's gonna be better with Mueller another year under his belt. And DK if he comes back, or, good finishers to be there to give him more opportunity to be comfortable. And do you think we'll see a different Nani this year, or what? Is he settled into Orlando City? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing him play with Pato
Yes.
because if those two get a good understanding of each other, I think there could be a lot of goals in this team this year. And you talk about Beckham and Nani's a guy like this. He's not always going to be the highest scorer on the team.
Mm,
I mean, they're both essentially attacking midfielders. They're not really strikers.
right.
Um, they make other people better and
Right.
they put them in positions to be successful. And that's what separates them from like a normal attacking midfielder. And I think that he'll probably have another good season. He is getting a little older. He's not
Right.
as fast as he once was. He used to be able to beat people for speed as well as, the technique. Not so much with the speed anymore, but he's a crafty guy and he still can pick out a pass and he's going to get his goals. He's going to get his assists. The numbers aren't going to be huge, but he's going to help other people get higher numbers than they would ordinarily.
Well, yeah, and we both had mentioned DK. What's the status of him now, and what do you think is best? Do you think it's good for him to come back into MLS and score 20 goals, or potentially have a breakout season, or is it better for the league? Is it better for Orlando City to sell him to a Premier League club, or maybe even Barnsley as they are looking to get promoted now?
Well, I mean, he's having a really good run of form over at Barnsley.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if his future is in England or in Europe in general, I think that'll happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be at Barnsley. I mean, they've made a big deal out of we can afford him. We can afford. Yeah, you can. You have a billionaire owner. Doesn't. I mean, but look at your history. You don't typically spend a lot of money on guys, and if you don't get promoted, you're not buying him. That's just. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just common sense. You're not a championship team's not spending $20 million on one player, especially when they have a history of not spending $20 million on one player. You
Right.
can fix multiple areas with that $20 million. So I think the best bet is if he keeps doing what he's doing, another club will come in and try to buy him at the end of that loan period. And I think if they can get a $20 million offer for a player they drafted last year, that's a great bit of business for the club.
Yeah.
It's good for Daryl's development. If Daryl comes back and scores, 12 to 15 goals or even more, that's only going to drive up his price even more. So, the sky is kind of the limit for him. He's got a very high ceiling. I think we've just seen glimpses of what he can do. He's a terrific guy. I've seen him compared to Romelu Lukaku,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a pretty good comparison. He's got really great feet, and he's a good passer, deceptively good passer. He's a very good hold-up guy. I think he's a better hold-up guy than Kyle Larin was. And
wow.
he can find the net. So he's got a high upside. I think he's going to get sold eventually.
Yeah.
My gut feeling is he comes back from Barnsley, plays into the summer. They find a buyer in the summer window, and then he goes somewhere else. And I think if you're an Orlando City fan, you'll be sad to see him go because he's a great player and he's a good kid. But at the same time, you have to realize it's good for the club.
Right.
They're not going to be hurting for goals if Pato is playing well and Benji Michel is developing. And oh, by the way, there's this kid from Georgetown, Derek Dodson, who's just reported to camp, whose potential is, he could be another guy that they develop into a guy who could score 10 or more goals a season. So
That's incredible.
whatever happens with DK, they just have to do right by the player and they have to do, make a wise decision for the club. And I think they'll do that. I trust Luis Muzi, the general manager, hasn't put a foot wrong since he's been here. And until he starts putting a foot wrong, I can't really knock the guy,
Exactly. And, it's got to be, as you described that, I'm thinking it's got to be a win-win situation because he goes abroad. That's great for U.S. men's national team. Great for Orlando City, like you're saying, raises the profile of the club and, opens us up to do other business in other transfer windows, etc. But if he comes back, he gets to play with Mueller more. And, with the way things are going up to the World Cup, that chemistry is invaluable if they find themselves on the pitch together.
Mm-hmm.
And and DK is not afraid to shoot either. You mentioned before, like Lukaku is one of his favorite players of all time, and the angles he's been scoring from for Barnsley are insane.
He's got so much power. I mean, we saw it from his first goal that he scored against Miami when he just smashed one that Luis Robles could only fight off, and then he was the first to the ball and put it in the net. I mean, I can't believe Robles even stopped that. As much power was on that, even though it was at him and he had to, just had to go straight. I was
Yeah.
surprised that he was able to keep it out. But yeah, the other good thing too is that if DK gets sold, that is something that young players in like South America will take notice of. This is a club that can get people moved on to European teams, and that's something that shouldn't be overlooked, because the scouting department for Orlando City has done a really great job in South America. And if they have that little bit of extra, prestige on the club, that they can say, hey, look, we're getting guys, $20 million deals overseas in Europe, that can only help them get better players down the road.
That's true. Certainly a saga that Orlando City fans will be following for a while now. Before we get you out of here, we touched on injuries a little bit, and that's always been the downfall of these, specifically these MLS incarnations of the Orlando City Club. Now, in their first, what feels like their first real full year, Miami has Phil Neville as a head coach. What sort of threat do they pose Orlando City, and is it already a bigger rivalry between us and them compared to us and New York?
I would say bigger than New York for sure. It's probably right on par with Atlanta United and Orlando. I will say I didn't really think much of the Orlando-Atlanta rivalry until Orlando got on the board in the series, because Atlanta kind of just one-sidedly owned that series. But once, with Orlando going undefeated against them in 4 games last year, I think now we'll start to see that even ramp up even more. These Southeastern games are going to get really contentious. But I thought, I was a little surprised they let their coach go, and I was a little surprised they brought in Phil Neville, to be honest with you, even though he's a friend of David Beckham's and was able to make that connection and bring him in. I don't know that Phil Neville's shown enough to have gotten this gig with what he did with a really, really strong England women's side. He didn't really win anything of note.
Right.
But I thought Diego Alonso did okay. He did get him in the playoffs. Now, they did play with 4 designated players last year, which is not something that most teams get to do. And we'll wait to see if there's any fallout from that. I mean, Major League Soccer doesn't have a real strong track record of disciplining clubs for breaking rules.
So what happened with that exactly? They went over the salary. How were they able to manage 4 designated players?
Well, they had 3 that they were called designated players, and then they signed Blaise Matuidi to what they called a targeted allocation money contract. But they went higher on his salary than what the cap would allow, or what they were permitted to spend under those circumstances. So, essentially, he was a 4th designated player. Now, they just today got roster compliant by buying out Matthias Pellegrini, who was one of their DPs, and they assigned him to their USL League One team.
Wow.
And I don't understand why Pellegrini would agree to that unless he has some kind of assurance from the club that he's going to get taken care of down the road. But they're back down to 3 designated players, and I don't, I don't think that honestly. I have a very, very low tolerance for cheating, especially when it comes to soccer. But it seems like soccer teams, it doesn't seem like anyone ever really gets punished properly. You see the financial fair play stuff all the time in Europe. You see teams get busted for it, and then they say, well, you can't have any inbound transfers for 2 years. And then like 6 months later, they say, okay, you're good now. You can go ahead and have inbound transfers. It happens all the time.
Yeah, when you think of morality, you look no further than Sepp Blatter, who, I don't know, is unscathed through all this. Final thing, what should fans, I'm talking about the diehards, the been with them since day one. What should the fans look for this season, and what should they pay attention to on the pitch? And what, as far as, we've been the cardiac cats, we've been, the comeback kids, we've been, there's some games where it feels like, oh my gosh, Nani just dialed it back 5-10 years. There are tens of different personalities. What do you think fans should look for on the pitch, and what do you think our personality, the Orlando City's personality, will be on the field this season?
I think we're going to see a lot of similarities to last year's team. Oscar's buzzword is protagonist. He wants his players to be protagonists of the game, take the game to the other team. And I think we saw that last year. I think this is a confident bunch, and I think they're still a very close bunch. They lost a couple guys in the offseason, but the chemistry seems just as good as it was. I think that people are going to want to watch for the development of a couple of young players. Andres Perea in the midfield is a guy who surprised everybody by playing every single game last year. It was surprising to see this kid in every game, but he did. And then he actually gets to play for the U23 US team in the Olympic qualifying tournament. I think he's going to take a step forward this year. I think that Benji Michel is in that third year now, about where Chris Mueller was when he took a step forward. So I see guys like, Vanderwater helping his development too, even though he's probably going to take some minutes away in some respects, but I think Benji will be better. I'd like to see, I think people shouldn't sleep on Alexander Pato, because he had been in training one day, played a preseason game the next day, just a few minutes on the pitch, he scored a goal. And he has scored three goals and 2 assists, and I think 5 preseason scrimmages where he was probably playing half the game. So, and these are all against good competition. They didn't play a bunch of scrubs in the preseason. They didn't play college teams. They didn't play USL teams. They played Philadelphia twice, Columbus. So there's this Porter Shield winner 2 times, the MLS Cup winner once. They played New York City FC. They played a really strong slate of preseason games. Minnesota United was the last one, another playoff team. So I'm looking for this team to continue what it did last year. I still think maybe 3rd or 4th place in the East is probably realistic. Columbus, they're a great team, and all they did was not lose anybody major and went out and got Bradley Wright Phillips, Kevin Molino. They just got better and better. And Philadelphia will be good again. They'll be strong. I think New England will be strong this year. But I think this team could, even if they slip to 5th or even 6th place, I think don't panic, because the real season starts in the playoffs. And this team is built to play in high pressure games, and they've had success in high pressure games already. So Oscar will continue his development of this team. He's a good coach. And I feel like that if you're watching this team, you're a fan of this team, and you're not really sure. The one great thing is there wasn't an overhaul in the off season like we've seen time after time after time. We didn't change coaches, and then there wasn't like a whole roster turnover. These are guys who have now played together. They know each other. They have good chemistry. They love each other. They enjoy playing together. So it's just a matter of keeping them healthy. And of course, we're going to be missing Pereira for the first 2 games because of his suspension at the end of last year. Going to be missing Moutinho till he gets back from his hip surgery. And there's a couple, there's always a couple of preseason nagging injuries that take a week or 2 to get fixed. But I think this is a strong team. And I think that the biggest reason why I don't think they take too much of a step forward in the standings is because they're not fooling anybody this year. No one's going to take them. No one's taking them lightly. Everybody's going to be up for this team this year. We're going to get everybody's best game. And that's exciting in itself, because you in the past you saw teams rest all their stars, at times, and they'd still come in and win by 3-1 or whatever.
Well, all eyes are on Orlando. Lot to build on from last season's success. The U.S. Open Cup TBD, we may make a run in that again, but we'll have to talk about that another day. Michael Citro, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. And if people want to check out the Mainland blog, it is what's the website for it?
It's themainland.com, and we spell Maine like a lion's mane, M-A-N-E. So it's themainland.com. And I do want to say that they just pushed the U.S. Open Cup this year. They announced it today. They were not going to have it in the spring. They may try to have it later in the year, but we might be looking at a second year without a U.S. Open Cup.
Well, that's going to complicate things. That's always a fun midweek trophy to check out. And Michael, thank you so much for joining me. I hope Orlando City has a great season. Congrats on another year of the blog. And thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.